can't handle another start over. We just liquidated 6 months ago. What are you trying to tell me? And, I got like no response, and I was at peace. It was a revelation that I just didn't want to believe. And that was in January. So come March, we're still having a really difficult time getting along with each other. We're having more and more arguments. They're getting heated. I'm feeling like I'm not being heard. He's still refusing to go to counseling. And I told him at that point, I started feeling really numb on the inside. And I was like feeling isolated. All of my relationships with my family of origin, like especially my sisters, were estranged. I felt like very detached. I kind of felt safer even being far away into Romania. So did you see my steps, like in the same state, but 3.5 hours away, then over 2,000 miles away, then over 6,000 miles away? Like that was massive growth for me. It was a lot of expansion that happened for all of us, to be honest. And, but I kind of put out a non-negotiable, and I said, you know what? My sister's getting married in May. We're going to go to America, but this will be our last vacation as a family. This is the last Hail Mary that I'm giving this. And if we can't figure this out with counseling, with therapy, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And, he said that we're going to do it, this and that. It was a typical, remorse, and we're going to change this, and we're going to do this, and blah, 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 which lasted always around maybe 1 to 2 weeks. And then we were back at square one. And so at that point, we had gone to America. We were visiting family. We were at a wedding. I was miserable at that wedding. I was super depressed. I couldn't even smile. I couldn't talk to anyone. I was not myself anymore. I was, I think a lot of people noticed that about me, especially my family, and even the family that we were visiting in the Northwest in Washington State. When they saw me, they were asking, what's wrong with Diana? And, for me, it was obviously I was crying out without crying out at that point. Because remember, I couldn't speak out. I would get wrath behind closed doors, and I just couldn't handle it anymore. So I just shut down. And so after that, we were back in Romania. We had went to a workshop, an intense workshop. It was a 60-hour workshop. It's called Love After Marriage. And at the very end of that workshop, it was a Christian workshop, and the husband and wife team that were teaching it and leading it said, under no circumstance, divorce is the worst case scenario. And I had told my ex-husband before that workshop, I told him, I said, I'm going for the jugular of this marriage. Either it's going to survive or it's going to die, because at this point, something's got to give. My mental health can't handle it anymore. I want, this freedom to actually love the kids, and I want life to look a certain way. And not many things changed. We were back in Romania. We toured a little bit with the kids, Romania. And then after that tour and all that travel, we were towards the end of the summer. It was the end of July, and we had just celebrated our 14th anniversary, which was pretty, nominal, just a low-key celebration. It was his birthday a couple of days later. We celebrated that. And then the day after, he was supposed to be leaving with our two older boys, to kickboxing camp in Romania with some of his old friends that he used to be in kickboxing with. And at that point, all our clothes were kind of mess, because we had just been on vacation and we're in Romania. Laundry's a thing there. It's a whole ordeal. And so I had done the usual. I was used to being this ultra independent person and had packed all of the things for that week for our kids. And he had packed some of his things, and the boys were dressed in just something typical, whatever. They were just going to be driving that day up into the mountain. And so whenever he saw them, which this was a big trigger for him from his childhood wounds that were still unhealed, because he hadn't gone to therapy and dealt with them, which is a big sticking point in my life and why I do the work that I do, and I, really guide our kids through the work that they do as well, because they've gone through a lot of trauma therapy. But he just hated how they were dressed. He was like, you need to go upstairs and find them clothes. I told him there aren't any other clothes. All their nice clothes are in their bag for the week that they're there. And so I go upstairs, and he follows me upstairs, and our kids were downstairs. And this was a pretty regular occurrence where our kids would witness like hours of arguments, because remember, I found my voice. And so I wasn't just laying down and taking it anymore. I was a strong-willed, independent woman trying to make my case. And the last thing I wanted our kids to see was that he was going to bully me and I was going to submit, because then that's teaching them that when they are bullied, they are to submit, or if they bully, people will submit, which are some things that we had to really unlearn after leaving this situation. But followed me upstairs. It was a large altercation. It was like the first time I had called him a name. I called him, stupid. I said, if you don't, I was always ultra respectful. Like I said many, many times, I respected the institution. Like, I loved marriage. I still love marriage. I love the relationship, the family, the core family, like what it's supposed to be. But I was so frustrated at that point where I was like, I can't continue to operate at these like high expectations. Our kids are not going to look like kids out of a GQ magazine all the time. Like, they're not. They're kids. They're going to get dirty. They're going to, they're going to have mismatching socks. They're going to be dressed the way they want to dress, And he said, why are you so tired? Maybe you should stop doing so much around the house. And at that point, I just said, if I stop doing things around the house, nothing's going to get done. And you're just too stupid to understand that. And that's when I saw like the demeanor shift and change. And he, flipped his lid, and then it became a physical altercation. It was, essentially just like pinned me down and was like telling me things. And I, wanted so badly to slap him, to be very honest. And that's the moment I decided I wanted to start doing jujitsu and MMA, because I said, I'll be damned before I'm ever in that type of situation and not able to get out of it and defend myself. So note to self, don't ever be in that type of situation, and learn at least the minimal in self-defense, okay? Because no one deserves to be treated that way. And the abuse that was happening was not always physical. There was only one other time that it happened in that way, but there were like times, especially in the very beginning, where the hand was raised, and I never gave a reason to be hit. Like, I just wasn't disrespectful. I loved my marriage. And so anyway, at that point, it really just like hit me, and I was like, this is it. Like, in a few years, which is actually coming up this summer, I will have been my married name as long as I've been my maiden name. I will have been married for as long as I was alive when I got married. 17 years in a few years. This is coming up in 2022 of July. And I was like, who am I? Which person am I? Because I remember what I had then. And even through all the trial and tribulation and like all of the adversity that I went through, I still loved life. I still had a zeal for life. I still, loved encouraging people and laughing and having jokes and doing things and feeling alive. And right now, who am I? I'm this robot. I'm this person that's only good when I'm productive in a certain way. And so I told him I needed to take that week that they were going to leave to think about what was going to happen, because, we had already had our conversation 4 months prior where I said, this marriage is hanging by a thread and it's probably going to be over. And he felt that and tried to, dial things in, was getting very desperate at that point. And I said, no, we're not talking. I'm taking time for myself. You need to take the boys, take them, go, and whatnot. And I had a spiritual mentor that had told me, and she had told me like prior to that, she was like, you're being really like, you're in a very controlling relationship. And I was like, oh, that's just the way he is and things like that. And what you'll learn about covert abuse, and for the victims in the abusive relationship is that they're in a fog. There's an emotional, mental fog where they just can't see things with clarity. But people from the outside, the third person perspective is very clear, and they see certain red flags. But I'm like, oh no. And so I called her after this, and I was like, I don't know what's, gonna happen. Like, I think I'm just gonna like ask him to move out and give me some space so I can think about it. And she told me, you better prepare for a really nasty divorce. And I said, no, that's not going to happen. He's going to learn his lesson, and this is going to be a testimony, and we're going to go in the ministry, and we're going to talk about like what life is and how the redemptive story can happen and what you do to resolve these issues as a married couple, and that we're a happy family and things like that. And she just let me be, and let me have my own revelation. And, that weekend I really went through the motions, and I went through all of my emotions too, where I, had to make a really hard decision on whether or not like I was going to actively break our children's hearts. Like, they don't understand why divorce needs to happen. They don't understand why they can't see their dad every day. They don't understand certain nuances. They do understand, that it's tumultuous. They do understand that there's a lot of yelling, there's a lot of crying, there's a lot of, domestic terrorism that happens where they're following you around and they're just arguing with you and won't leave you in peace. They did understand the fact that we were wasting a lot of time arguing, hours upon hours, where our kids would sit there and witness it. And so that was a really hard decision for me to make, coming from the religion that I came from, coming from the family I came from, and the reasons that I actually, wanted to stay within that institution. And so whenever I finally made the decision, it was Sunday night. Sunday I'd gone to church with my girls and the baby because they were left at home with me. And there was a sermon about what marriage actually looks like, and how it's like a camaraderie and a partnership. And I felt like that's definitely not what my marriage was like. And so I went home that night. I put the kids to sleep, and I sat down and I was scrolling through Facebook, and there was an excerpt from a book called Is It Me? Making Sense of Your Confusing Marriage by Natalie Hoffman. And it was shared by a nonprofit organization called Give Her Wings Academy. And I clicked on that excerpt and I read it, and it just struck me. And I don't remember what it was, but it just struck me, and it just pierced my heart. And I sat there, and then I went down that rabbit hole. I visited her website where she had podcasts, and she had the transcriptions to the podcast, and I was reading through a podcast, and tears are streaming down my eyes as I'm reading, and she's describing what covert abuse looks like and why women typically stay in these religiously indoctrinated and culturally conditioned relationships, because that's what we're taught is like our purpose is to like be a martyr basically, and to live in this relationship, and to lay our lives down and be submissive no matter what, and which is, she had some biblical conversations in her book, it's really geared towards Christianity and how we've contorted and twisted certain areas of doctrine to allude to the fact that this marriages are impenetrable, and that no matter what they have to stay together, which is false, because the covenant has been broken. Once someone is dehumanizing the other person, that's not what God speaks of whenever he speaks of a partnership and a marriage, a loving marriage, where the man is supposed to love his wife as Christ loved the church and gave his own life for her. That's what marriage has to look like. And then it's a cohesive blend. And so I'm reading this, I'm tears are welling up. I can't even read because I'm crying so much, because she's talking to this woman on a podcast who had stayed for 5 years, or who, was asking like, when is it long enough? When have I stayed long enough to give it a good try? And, she's talking about like people that stayed like 2 years and 3 years and 5 years. And here I am, 14 years in, knowing from the get-go that this is wrong. Something's not right. It's just not working. And knowing that, this is not what God wants for me as his child, as his daughter, this is not what my dad would want for me. If my earthly father doesn't want it, like, how could I even presume that my heavenly father would want it for me? And so that night I was really having like a spiritual encounter, and I went really, inside of myself, and I had a couple of, revelations. And that night I really, really grieved, because I really thought that my ministry would be, that our ministry would be for families and for like wholesome families and being intentional with children and like really living a life that's like worth living, right, with family. And so I was grieving that like in the church I would probably be put to the wayside, and my testimony would no longer be, it would be discredited. And that really hurt me, because I stayed so long and I fought the good fight, thinking that, this is definitely like what God wants me to do, that I'm being like a good soldier, and I'm fighting the good fight. And then I had a revelation where, I saw Jesus. It was like a reenactment of the scene where Peter is called and beckoned out onto the choppy waters, and Jesus is out on really dark and choppy, stormy waters, and it's dark all around him, and it's just him that I'm seeing. And he's holding his hand out, and he says, "Will you follow me onto uncharted waters?" Because, believe it or not many people are talking about this. And I agreed, and I said, yes, I will. And I said, but God, I'm going to be discredited in front of the church. And he said, don't worry about that. We're going to pivot, because ministry might have looked one way in the beginning, but now it might look a different way. And he has all of these different plans laid out these paths that we can go through. And at that point, I knew that I had fought the good fight. I actually probably overstayed much longer than what even God might have like intended. But because I chose to stay, I feel like, my character was refined, and God was so faithful in my life. And just, it was like this compounding interest and growth in my life and in everything that I had become, this strong person on the inside. Even though I felt so weak and numb inside, lo and behold, I'm about to make a pivotal decision. And so I made that decision. And at that point, I, said, okay, God, like, I trust you, and we're going to go through this, but I have to do it my way. So I wrote a long, detailed letter. I'm an ICU nurse. Everything's in writing, everything. If you didn't document it, you didn't do it. And I'm a businesswoman. So everything's written down in an email. And I emailed him, and I said, I would like to pilot a separation. I'd like for you to live apart from me. You can visit the kids and take them, every day, things like that. I want you to figure out who you are as a person, first of all, and get your life in a place where you feel very secure as a human and your spirituality is strong, and let me figure out my things as well. I need to be who I am, and I don't even know if you're going to like that person anymore. And so he had a very, very difficult time accepting that, to a point where we were having a telephone conversation, and, we were both crying. This was a very difficult decision to come to. And he said, I kept asking myself why God gave me such a good woman that I would never be able to live up to. And, I just wish that could have been like actually like an act on it. Like, he could have taken those thoughts and that process and like that internal process and actually externalized it and acted on it before it was too late. Because I've heard a saying recently that said, every time you forgive him, he loves you more, but you love him less. And that's what essentially happens. You become desensitized and you detach and disassociate from the relationship. And so he came back, we split whatever finances were left over, which were like pennies on the dollar compared to what we had, had less than a year prior. And we split the cars. He moved into an apartment, and we were trying to pilot this thing. And at one point, he had gotten super impulsive and was saying, we need a timeline. Like, I can't wait. Like, there's this certain thing with like, I need sexual intimacy with my wife. That's our biblical duty, da 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 da. And I was like, you know what? I've been your wife for 14 years. I was a virgin when we got married. You've gotten whatever you wanted. It's my turn to just like be able to detach. And if I'm not worth you waiting this, whatever amount of time it takes for me to heal and for me to actually trust you and for me to actually love you and be in love with you, then it's just not going to work. And it became a very toxic and impulsive situation where I felt really unsafe. And I had talked to a few different counselors, and also I reached out to my parents at that point, and I had an inundation of support from my family of origin, my sisters that I was estranged from and isolated from. They reached out and they said, Diana, we support you. We never thought that you would do it, but we're here for you. We're waiting for you. Buy tickets and come here and we'll help you. And that was overwhelmingly beautiful for me to see. And it started that healing process and that process of exponential gratitude. And so what happened was we had one last altercation in Romania, and he became very impulsive, and I was afraid. And so I bought tickets, and one night I had acted like we were going to go to a prayer meeting about an hour away. And actually, I took the kids. I had packed 2 or 3 suitcases, which is all we came with from Romania. And I had hid them. He had taken them out to ice cream. I had taken those suitcases with a friend that had come, I had talked to put them away and start driving, and so that he wouldn't see them. It was planned. Like, as a survivor, you learn how to plan A through Z. You see everything through, because the last thing you want is to get caught, get stuck, and then live with those repercussions. And that's why the statistics show that people fail leaving at least 7 times before they actually leave successfully an abusive relationship. And so that night, we ran away through Budapest, Hungary. And he had been kind of, driving past and stalking, and saw that we were gone and was blowing up my phone. And I told him at one point, I was told, just tell him you went to Bucharest, which is clear across the country. And so I told him that. I called my friends from Bucharest, and I was like, can you just tell him that I went there and I'm actually going to Budapest? I'm running away to my family. I'll explain later. And so they did. They agreed. And he booked a flight to Bucharest, and we were already on a flight from Budapest to the States. And I went to Arkansas to my family of origin to seek refuge there and to start the divorce process, because I felt like I needed protection from the law, and that I was going to hopefully get that, which I didn't know that Arkansas law was so archaic in the way of, divorces and things like that. So that wound up being really volatile situation. I couldn't press charges for a night where we had an altercation and it got physical again. I couldn't press charges for harassment the day after, whenever he was going around to my family of origin and throwing threats back and forth, because I had taken the kids back after he had withheld them to try and blackmail me into signing 50% custody over to him, because he believed that that's what he wanted, even though he was so detached from the kids and was not very active in their day-to-day routines. And I had offered him a clean divorce. I begged him for a clean divorce. I said, if there's one thing that I think I have earned out of this marriage after 14 years and so much hard work, it's a clean divorce. I don't want our kids to go through what we went through. I want to protect them from that. This marriage is dead. we're just signing the death certificate. That's what the divorce is. And he vehemently refused. He hired an attorney. It got super volatile and ugly. And I wound up having to run away to Washington State again so that I could detach my family, which had had a lot of unresolved trauma and wounds from the divorce we had went through, and for us to be able to get some sort of more progressive protection like we were able to get in Washington State. So I went there, filed for a protective order. In the meantime, his attorney showed up because he hired an attorney, a criminal law attorney. I had to argue against her in court for my protective order because I couldn't find an attorney. It was December. It was right around the holidays, and I won. So don't ever give up and just state your case and be authentic. And but I did find out that he had kicked the divorce in Arkansas into active and had filed for emergency custody, stating that I had lost my mind, that I didn't know what I was doing, that I was, crazy, that I was just running from place to place with the kids. And so I had to take the kids after our hearing for the protective order. Within 2 days, turned back around, flew from Seattle to Little Rock with all 5 kids, left them with my mom, went to court in Arkansas where we won. And my attorney told me afterwards that he had never had a case ruled in his favor in that courtroom by that judge. So that was huge for me. It was really like a green light with, let's keep going. This is what we need to be doing. And I came back to the West Coast with the kids, and we embarked on our journey. January was, after the holidays in January, I got super, super sick. I think like all the stress caught up to me, and newsflash, it was probably COVID. We just weren't testing for it at that time. So I was like deathly ill. I thought I had a sinus infection afterwards. I looked miserable. I felt miserable. I sounded miserable. And I showed up miserable to every court hearing where my attorney said, just keep something on your face so you don't give this to anyone. And, we slowly but surely were starting to go through the beginning phases of the divorce.